All right, deep divers, welcome back. You know what we're tackling today? Something pretty awesome.
Oh, yeah.
The world of poker tournaments.
Tournaments. Love it.
Specifically, pre-flop strategy.
Nice.
And to guide us on this journey, we have a masterclass by Johnathan Little,
Oh, wow. Johnathan Little. All right.
the poker pro himself. So we're talking about those critical decisions you make before the flop even hits the table, before the action really gets going.
Yeah. Tournaments, they have a completely different feel compared to cash games. It's a whole other beast. It's not just about stacking chips.
Right.
It's a strategic battle for survival.
Absolutely. It's about outlasting your opponents, climbing that payout ladder, and ultimately taking home the gold.
Right. That's it.
Now, Johnathan Little, he starts off by highlighting a key difference between tournament poker and those casual cash games we might be used to. Just a friendly game with friends.
Right. In a tournament, the value of those chips in front of you, it's not constant. It fluctuates as the tournament progresses.
Oh, that's interesting.
Early on, they might not be worth as much. But as you get closer and closer to that final table, each chip becomes significantly more valuable.
Right, because you're that much closer to winning.
Exactly.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
So it's not just about amassing chips.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the shifting value of those chips.
Yeah.
In relation to your tournament life depends on it.
Yeah, it does.
Now Little dives into this concept of stack depth awareness,
Okay.
which for our listeners is basically how many big blinds you have left.
Right.
And he really emphasizes the importance of understanding this because it dictates your entire strategy.
It does. Knowing your stack depth, it's like having a roadmap to
Yeah.
navigate those different tournament stages.
Yeah, like
It determines the hands you can play, the risks you can take, and ultimately your chances of survival.
I love that analogy. A roadmap to success.
It is.
Okay? Now Little here, he focuses specifically on 25, 15, and 10 big blind scenarios, which are pretty common spots to find yourself in, especially in those middle and later stages of the tournament.
You're going to find yourself there.
For sure.
Yeah.
So let's start with that 25 big blind range.
Okay.
This is where Little introduces this idea of game theory optimal play, or GTO for short.
Okay. GTO.
GTO.
So GTO is all about making decisions that are unexploitable,
Right.
no matter who your opponent is. It's a really solid foundation,
Yeah.
especially when you're facing unfamiliar players at the table.
Right. You don't know their tendencies.
Exactly.
You're meeting them for the first time.
Yeah. Think of it as a mathematically sound approach to minimize your risk and maximize your long-term winnings.
So it's a way to play strategically without relying on reads or assumptions about your opponents.
Right.
Interesting. And Little provides these really detailed pre-flop raising charts
Yes.
based on your position at the table, which
Wow.
blew my mind.
What's fascinating about these charts is they challenge some of that traditional poker wisdom that we might think we know. You'll find some unconventional insights, like how Queen 6 suited can actually be stronger than Pocket 3s in certain situations.
Wait, really? Queen 6 suited? Stronger than pocket 3s? That sounds so counterintuitive.
It is, but that's the beauty of GTO. It considers all possible outcomes, and it helps you make the most profitable decision in the long run. In this case, Queen 6 suited has more potential to make straights and flushes, which become increasingly valuable. As the tournament progresses, you need those big hands to survive those crucial all-in confrontations later on.
Yeah, you need to make those big hands.
Yes, you do.
So it's not just about the strength of your hand right now.
Right.
It's about the potential it has in a tournament setting. Because you might need that flush
I might.
or that straight to stay alive.
Exactly.
Now, another interesting point Little brings up is limping in the small blind
Okay.
when you're first to act, and he even advocates for this with some surprisingly strong hands.
Yeah.
Which I thought was fascinating.
He's challenging the norm here. A lot of players would automatically raise with those hands, but Little points out that limping can actually be more profitable in tournaments, especially when you consider the pot odds.
Okay, break that down for me. What exactly are pot odds, and why do they matter so much in this scenario?
Simply put, pot odds are the ratio of the potential reward to the risk you're taking.
Got it.
So in the small blind, you're already putting in a small amount,
Right. The big blind.
the big blind. So you're getting a great price to see the flop.
Because you've already put in a little bit.
Exactly. Limping allows you to play a wider range of hands profitably, especially against those passive players who love to call.
So you're saying that even though it might seem weak to limp,
Right.
it's actually a strategic move to maximize your potential winnings in the long run.
Exactly. It's about finding those hidden edges and exploiting them.
Of course.
You still need to be mindful of your opponents and adjust accordingly.
Right. You can't just limp with anything.
Right.
You need to know what you're doing.
Exactly.
Okay? That makes sense. Now let's talk about facing a raise at 25 big blinds.
Okay.
Little breaks it down into 3 primary options.
Right.
Calling 3-betting without going all in and shoving all in.
Yes.
All right. So 3 very distinct options.
And he's very clear about the factors
Mm.
to consider when choosing each option. It's not just about the strength of your hand.
Right.
It's about your position, your opponent's tendencies, and the overall tournament dynamics.
The whole picture.
The whole picture. He provides these incredibly helpful charts that illustrate which hands to play in each scenario, giving you a clear framework for making those tough decisions.
It's like having a cheat sheet
It is.
for navigating those complex situations.
It is, but it's not just about blindly following charts.
Right.
The real skill lies in recognizing deviations from standard play
Interesting.
and capitalizing on them.
So it's about becoming a poker detective, observing your opponents, identifying their patterns, and then adjusting your strategy accordingly.
Exactly. That's what separates the good players from the great players.
Wow.
They have that ability to read the table, understand their opponents, and make those calculated adjustments to maximize their edge.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about the cards. It's about understanding the psychology of the game. It is. And how to exploit your opponent's weaknesses. You're playing the player.
You are.
You're playing the player.
As much as you're playing the cards.
As much as you're playing the cards. That's right. Now things get even more interesting when your stack dwindles down to 15 big blinds.
Oh, boy. Okay, let's talk about that. What are some of the key strategic shifts we need to make when we're playing with a shorter stack, 15 big blinds or less?
Well, one of the biggest changes is that 3-betting without going all in becomes much less viable.
Oh, really? Why is that?
The pot odds just don't work out in your favor anymore.
So it's basically a choice between shoving all in or just calling.
In most cases, yes.
Mhm.
You need to be more decisive and avoid those tricky situations where you're stuck with a tough decision.
Yeah.
After your opponent shoves, you don't want to be caught in the middle.
You don't want to be in no man's land.
You don't want to be there.
Got it. And what about defending our big blinds? Does our strategy change there as well? Absolutely. Little actually recommends defending your big blind much more aggressively at 15 big blinds than you would at 25.
Really? Why is that?
I would think you'd want to play tighter.
It's all about those pot odds again. With fewer chips at risk, you can actually call raises with a wider range of hands, hoping to hit a strong flop and double up. Remember, survival is key at this stage.
So while it might seem risky to call with weaker hands,
Right.
the potential reward of doubling our stack outweighs the risk of losing a relatively small portion of it.
Exactly. It's about finding those spots where you can leverage your position and the pot odds to your advantage. So we're not just playing tight and conservative
No,
when we have a shorter stack.
Right.
It's about being strategic
it is.
and aggressive when the situation calls for it.
Got it. And in the small blind at 15 big blinds, it basically becomes a choice between limping or open shoving,
Okay.
depending on your hand strength and your read on your opponent.
Oh, so many factors.
I know.
Okay, I'm starting to see the complexities of tournament poker. It's not just about the cards.
It's not.
It's about understanding the dynamics of each stage, adapting your strategy, and making those tough decisions under pressure. It's a whole mental game.
It is. And we're just scratching the surface here. There's so much more to
Well,
explore.
I'm ready to dive deeper.
But we've covered a lot of ground already. So let's take a break and come back to dive even deeper into Johnathan Little's tournament strategy.
I love it.
All right. We'll be back
We'll be back
for
on
more.
poker strategy
Yeah.
in just a bit.
All right. Sounds good. Okay. So we're back. And we're still in that crucial 15 big blind scenario. Remember, at this stage of the tournament, every decision, every chip, it carries so much more weight.
They really do represent our tournament life at this point.
They do.
So Little, he digs deeper into playing against a 3-bet when we only have 15 big blinds. And it seems like our options are pretty limited here.
They are 3-betting without going all in. It becomes very risky. Because of those pot odds, if we 3-bet small and our opponent shoves, we're getting terrible odds to call. It's just not a good spot to be in.
Right. So we're basically left with shoving all in or just calling Things are getting pretty intense here.
They are. Every decision has to be calculated, weighing risk versus reward. But there are some surprising strategies that Johnathan Little recommends, like defending our big blind, much more widely than at 25 big blinds.
Yeah, that seems counterintuitive. Why would we open ourselves up to more risk with a smaller stack?
Again, it all comes down to those pot odds. With fewer chips at risk, we can actually call raises with a wider range of hands, hoping to hit that strong flop and double up. Remember, survival is key at this stage.
So while it might seem risky to call with weaker hands, the potential reward of doubling our stack outweighs the risk of losing a relatively small portion of it.
Exactly. Little even highlights situations where calling with hands like King 7 offsuit or Queen 8 suited can actually be profitable, even against a tight player.
Wow, those are hands that we usually fold without hesitation.
I know. But that's the beauty of tournament poker. It challenges conventional wisdom and forces us to adapt our strategies based on those ever-changing dynamics. Remember, we're not just playing against our opponents.
Right.
We're playing against the structure of the tournament itself.
Oh, that's a really interesting point. So when we're short stacked, it's not just about playing tight and conservative.
Right.
It's about being strategic and exploiting those opportunities
Right.
where the pot odds are in our favor.
You got it. And that strategic thinking extends to our decisions. In the small blind as well, at 15 big blinds, it essentially becomes a choice between limping or open shoving.
Okay, so how do we decide which approach to take? That seems like a pretty critical decision point.
It is. The choice really depends on the strength of our hand and our read on our opponent, if we have a strong hand, and suspect our opponent might fold. Open shoving can be a great way to steal those blinds and antes, adding to our stack. But if we sense our opponent is more likely to call our shove, limping in and seeing a flop might be the smarter play. It's all about balancing those potential rewards of quick win against the possibility of playing a larger pot post-flop.
Wow, it seems like every little detail matters.
It does. With a shallow stack, every decision counts. We need to carefully balance the risk of getting shoved on with the potential rewards of winning a big pot.
This is getting really complex. There are so many factors to consider. Stack sizes, positions, opponent tendencies, and those ever-important pot odds. It's amazing how much depth there is to even these seemingly simple scenarios.
That's what makes tournament poker so challenging and rewarding. It's a game of constant adaptation, where even the smallest edge can make a huge difference in the long run. But don't worry, Johnathan Little breaks down these concepts in a way that's easy to understand and apply at the table.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Now, I know things get even more intense. When we're down to 10 big blinds, Little calls this the danger zone.
Yeah.
And I can definitely see why.
He's not kidding. At this stage, we're essentially playing push or fold poker, making those quick, decisive moves based solely on the strength of our hand. There's not much room for fancy play or elaborate bluffs.
So it's all about survival at this point. Just shove with our strong hands and fold everything else.
Pretty much. Little even recommends using a push-fold app to simplify decision-making at this stack depth. It might seem a bit extreme, but it actually makes a lot of sense.
How so?
Well, at 10 big blinds, the margins are so thin that even a slight miscalculation can cost you your tournament life. Using a push-fold app helps you make those quick, mathematically correct decisions, eliminating those costly mistakes. That can send you to the rail. You know, sometimes our emotions can get the best of us.
Right, so it takes the emotion out of it.
Exactly.
And it allows us to focus on other important aspects of the game, like reading our opponents and observing their tendencies.
Precisely. It's about simplifying our decision-making process so we can allocate our mental energy to those crucial areas that can give us an edge.
That's a really smart approach. It's like having a co-pilot to help us navigate those turbulent waters of the tournament's late stages. But there's one exception to this push-fold strategy, right? Something about the small blind.
You're right. Even in this extreme scenario, Little suggests we can still limp and play a bit more strategically from the small blind, taking advantage of those juicy pot odds we get.
So there's still room for some creativity and strategic play, even when we're down to our last few chips.
Absolutely. It's a more advanced concept that requires a solid understanding of ranges and post-flop play. But for players who can master this nuanced approach, it can provide a significant edge.
I can see how that would be a valuable skill to have in your arsenal. Now, what about facing an all-in bet at 10 big blinds? Does our position at the table still matter as much at this stage?
You bet it does. In fact, your position and the number of players left to act become even more crucial when facing an all-in bet with a short stack.
Okay, walk me through that. How does our position affect our decision-making in these situations?
Let's imagine a scenario where the under-the-gun player shoves all in. If you're next to act, your calling range needs to be extremely tight.
Why is that?
Because there are still several players left to act, any of whom could wake up with a monster hand and reshove, putting you in a very difficult spot.
So it's all about minimizing risk
Uh,
when we're in early position. And there are still a lot of unknowns.
exactly. You don't want to jeopardize your tournament life by making a loose call with so much action still to come.
Yeah.
But if you're in the big blind and everyone else is folded to that under the gun shove, you can actually call much more liberally.
Oh, interesting. So our calling range really does change that drastically based on our position.
It does,
Why is that?
because you're essentially heads up against the shover. There's no one left to put pressure on you. So you can afford to take more risks and call with a wider range of hands.
So even with a tiny stack, our position at the table can dramatically influence our decision-making process.
It can. And Johnathan Little actually provides specific charts that illustrate how our calling range changes based on our position and the number of players left to act.
It's like he's thought of every possible scenario.
He has. Those charts are incredibly valuable for visualizing these concepts and understanding how even subtle shifts in position can drastically impact our strategy.
It's like a whole new level of poker understanding.
It is. He emphasizes that it's not about blindly following charts, though. It's about developing a deep understanding of the underlying logic and applying it to different game situations.
So it's about combining those mathematical principles with our own observations and reads on our opponents to make the most profitable decisions. It's like a delicate dance between science and art.
Exactly. And that's what makes poker so fascinating. There's always something new to learn, always another layer to uncover, always another way to refine our approach.
It sounds like we need to be constantly evolving and adapting to stay ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. Complacency is the enemy of progress, especially in a game as dynamic and challenging as poker. Now, before we wrap up our discussion of 10 big blind strategy, there is one more crucial concept I want to highlight. It's all about those tricky situations where we raise and face a shove at 25 big blinds.
Okay, this sounds intriguing. What's the key insight here?
So Johnathan Little dives into how our calling range should shift when that shove comes after a 3-bet. It adds another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation.
Right, so if we raise and someone 3-bets and then another player shoves all in over the top, how do we even begin to process all that information?
It's definitely a mental workout. The key here, according to Little, is to accurately assess our opponent's shoving range. Are they shoving with a balanced range, a mix of strong and bluffing hands, or are they only shoving with premium hands?
I could see how that would be crucial. But how can we possibly know what our opponent is holding? It's like we're trying to read their minds.
It's not about mind reading, but more like pattern recognition. We need to consider their previous actions, their betting patterns, their overall style of play. Are they aggressive or passive? Are they loose or tight? Have they been showing down strong hands or bluffing a lot? All these clues can help us narrow down their likely range.
So it's like putting together a puzzle, using all the available information to create a picture of our opponent's hand.
Exactly. And once we have a better understanding of their shoving range, we can make a more informed decision about whether to call or fold.
Makes sense. Little also mentions that in tournaments, especially when we're close to a payout jump, it's often wise to play a bit more cautiously.
He's absolutely right. Those payout jumps represent significant milestones in a tournament, and we don't want to risk our hard-earned progress by making a loose call that could bust us out. It's often better to err on the side of caution and preserve our chips for those critical moments where we have a stronger hand or a more favorable situation.
So while we might be tempted to gamble and go for that big pot, sometimes the smarter play is to fold and live to fight another day.
Exactly. Patience and discipline are essential qualities for any successful tournament poker player. Knowing when to fold a decent hand, especially when the risks outweigh the potential rewards, is what separates the amateurs from the pros.
Makes sense.
Okay.
It's not just about winning every hand. It's about making smart decisions that maximize our chances of long-term success.
Absolutely. And speaking of smart decisions, Little also offers some valuable insights for those blind versus blind confrontations, which can be particularly tricky.
Yeah, those are the situations where we're in the small blind and the only other player left is in the big blind, right? What makes those spots so challenging?
Well, blind versus blind battles often involve wide ranges and complex dynamics. For example, if we limp in the small blind and the big blind shoves all in, our calling range needs to be fairly wide.
Why is that?
Because we're getting excellent pot odds. Remember, we've already invested a small amount, the small blind, and we're getting the chance to win the entire pot, which includes the big blind and any antes.
So even though we might not have a great hand, the potential reward justifies calling with a wider range of hands.
Exactly. It's a situation where we need to trust our reads, consider our opponent's tendencies, and be willing to gamble a bit to maximize our potential winnings.
So those blind versus blind battles, they're a real test of our poker instincts and our ability to make those tough decisions under pressure.
They are. But with practice and a solid understanding of the underlying principles, we can learn to navigate those spots effectively and even turn them into profitable opportunities.
Throughout this entire video, Johnathan Little repeatedly emphasizes the importance of observation and adaptation as crucial skills in tournament poker. It's not enough to simply memorize charts or follow a rigid set of rules.
He's absolutely right. Tournament poker is a dynamic game filled with unpredictable situations and diverse opponents. We need to be constantly analyzing the action, adjusting our strategy, and exploiting those opportunities that present themselves.
So it's not just about the cards. It's about being a keen observer, a strategic thinker, and a master of adaptation.
Exactly. Recognizing patterns in our opponent's play, identifying their tendencies, and exploiting their weaknesses is what separates the good players from the great ones. It's about being one step ahead, anticipating their moves, and using that information to our advantage.
It sounds like tournament poker. It's more of an art than a science.
It's a bit of both. You need the mathematical foundation.
Yeah.
You also need that intuition and that ability to read people and adapt to the ever-changing dynamics.
So after this deep dive into Johnathan Little's tournament wisdom, what's the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
I think he's given us a comprehensive breakdown of pre-flop tournament strategy across various stack depths. But even more importantly, he's highlighted the importance of adaptability and that constant pursuit of improvement.
It's not just about memorizing charts or following a set of rules. It's about understanding the underlying principles, developing our poker instincts, and constantly refining our approach to the game.
Exactly. And as Little reminds us at the end of the video, the journey to becoming a successful tournament poker player starts with a solid foundation of pre-flop strategy. But it's a journey that requires dedication, discipline, and a willingness to constantly learn and grow.
So for our listeners who are ready to embark on that journey, what type of player should they aspire to be?
That's a great question. Johnathan Little leaves us with this thought-provoking challenge. What kind of player will you be? Will you be a tight, conservative grinder who waits for premium hands and minimizes risk? Or will you be an aggressive, fearless shark who exploits weaknesses and puts constant pressure on your opponents? The choice is yours. There's no right or wrong answer. The key is to find a style that suits your personality, your strengths, and your goals.
It's about discovering your own unique path to success in the world of tournament poker. Well, that's a wrap on this deep dive into the world of pre-flop tournament poker strategy. Thanks for joining us on this journey. And remember to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing your poker game to new heights.